Please be seated. House has resumed its sitting. When we took the lunch break, the Honorable Minister of Health had risen. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to bring to the attention of this honorable House details of the exceptional circumstance appropriation changes approved by Cabinet for the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing. Mr. Speaker, there were several instances in which Cabinet was requested to approve the reallocation of funds and/or the approval of supplementary funding under the provisions of Section 11(5) and 6 of the Public and Finance Management Law as it relates to my ministry's 16-17 budget, listed as follows. On the 9th of August 2016, $625,000 was approved for a settlement of a medical claim. On the 29th of October 2016, Cabinet approved supplementary funding for NGS 55 of $3,908,393. On the 17th of January 2017, Cabinet granted approval for a reallocation of $30,000 from TP73 to TP72. On the 28th of March 2017, Cabinet approved supplementary funding to increase MRC 15 by $1.260 million. Also on the 28th of March 2017, supplementary funding was approved to increase HEA 6 by $87,500. Another approval was granted on the 28th of March 2017 to increase the appropriation of NGS 55 by $4 million. On the 22nd of August 2017, funding for a settlement payment to a claim was approved for $4.5 million. On the 22nd of August 2017, Cabinet approved supplementary funding of NGS 55 by $6,268,403 million. On the 12th of December 2017, Cabinet granted approval for the reallocation of $385,000 from EI 53 to HES 7, an additional appropriation increase of HES 7 by $2.442 million. Mr. Speaker, another approval on the 12th of December 2017 was to transfer funds in the amount of $1.445 million from EI 53 to HES 7. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on the 12th of December 2017, an approval was made to reallocate $29,000 from EI 53 to EI 47. Mr. Speaker, I would now like to speak to each of these appropriations in turn. Mr. Speaker, as members will be aware, the Health Services Authority was a core government agency prior to becoming a statutory authority. As a result, the government is liable for any medical negligence claims arising from care prior to the transition to an authority. Most of these past claims have been resolved. However, the claim $625,000 was paid for a settlement of an outstanding claim. Mr. Speaker, in December 2016, the then Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture was approached by the minister responsible for sports to assist in sponsoring an event, namely Island Rumble Boxing Challenge, with Manny Pacquiao, which was held in Grand Cayman on the 7th of January 2017. The Island Rumble was deemed as an event of national significance, exposing the islands on an international level, Mr. Speaker. As such, it was agreed that support would be offered to the Ministry of Sports in the amount of $30,000, which resulted in a transaction from budget heading TP73, other health and cultural programs assistance, to TP72, other youth and sports programs. Mr. Speaker, in March 2017, the Ministry of Home Affairs, Health and Culture presented a request to Cabinet on behalf of the Mosquito Research and Control Unit for approval to expand the local genetically modified mosquito program, which was being conducted by Oxitec Cayman. Mr. Speaker, the request was a move to continue control efforts against the Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. As this honorable House may be aware, the Aedes aegypti is a vector that spreads dengue fever, chikungunya, and the Zika virus. Mr. Speaker, at the time of the request, MRCU was in the midst of an initial GMO program in a controlled area of West Bay. The then director of MRCU reported that the West Bay program proved effective as evidenced by a significant reduction in the Aedes aegypti population in the treatment area. Given the apparent success of that operational trial, MRCU presented a business case for the island-wide expansion of the program. Conventional methods of mosquito population control, such as pesticides, spraying, and fogging, failed to stop the spread of Aedes aegypti. Continued efforts in tackling this mosquito species are required to reduce or eliminate public health threats. Mr. Speaker, the proposal at the time was the operational plan to cover all districts in Grand Cayman over a 2-year period. Oxitec was expected to be contracted as a sole source supplier to implement the control program over a 24-month period, after which MRCU was hoped to be in a position to take over suppression, elimination of the vector. The island-wide program, Mr. Speaker, would have required that Oxitec Cayman Limited establish a local production facility and hire 30 additional staff with intensive control operations to be undertaken and progress monitored by MRCU. The cost of the projected program was at that time proposed to be $7.5 million, not including the cost of the production facility. The proposed payment schedule for $1.5 million in 2017 and $3 million in 2018 and $3 million in 2019. Mr. Speaker, it was expected to be an operational expense, so that MRCU's output funding needed to be increased to accommodate expenditures. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development advised the supplementary expenditure would have resulted in $1.5 million increase in operating expenditure, potentially reducing the government's forecast surplus and cash reserves for 2016-17 financial year, unless offsetting reductions were identified. Mr. Speaker, at that point, the Ministry of Finance was unable to recommend precise reductions to operating expenditure appropriations to offset the increase. However, Mr. Speaker, the exercise was to be done during the preparations of supplementary appropriation bill at the end of 2016-17 financial year. As such, Mr. Speaker, supplementary funding approval was granted for the Ministry of Home Affairs, Health and Culture to increase the appropriations for MRC 15, disease prevention and control, by additional $1.5 million. This represented a portion of then proposed $7.5 million cost to roll out the program. These funds were not utilized by the program as at the end of the year 2016-17. As an update to this matter, Mr. Speaker, during the subsequent budget discussions, the remaining funding for this project was not approved and the amount originally proposed, therefore preventing a contractual commitment for the program expansion at the island-wide level. However, this Honorable House should be made aware that on the 9th of May 2018, a second implementation agreement was executed to restart treatment areas in the previous treatment area of West Bay for a 10-month period with different treatment perimeters at a cost of $588,000, funding which was available in the MRCU budget. Mr. Speaker, in March 2017, Cabinet approved $87,500 in supplementary funding for emergency room internal medicine physician at the Faith Hospital in Cayman Brac. As this Honorable House is aware, the Faith Hospital is the only designated hospital in Cayman Brac, and ER coverage is a critical component of the community health care services. Although the mission is to provide trauma and emergency services for those imminent dangers of losing their life or suffering permanent damage, the role of emergency services has evolved to include responses to natural disasters, mass casualty events, and even public health emergencies, such as disease outbreaks and other communicable diseases. The ER also caters to after hours, not emergencies. Mr. Speaker, the Health Services Authority presented the ministry with a business case detailing the various costs involved with this request. The final agreed amount for this request was half of the cost needed to cover the physician's salary, pensions, health insurance, registration, accommodation, and allowances, etc. Mr. Speaker, at the time of the request, ER duties were performed by the 4 physicians, the general practitioner, the general surgeon, the obstetrician, and the gynecologist, and anesthesiologist on an alternating basis. After hours and weekend emergencies were covered off-site by the physician. The 3 specialist physicians rotating in the ER were also on call for surgical, obstetric, gynecologic, and anesthetic, and critical care emergency 24-hour per day, 7 days per week. The surgeon was also on call as a senior manager for all the administrative and major clinical issues involved in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. Mr. Speaker, the surgeon also has the responsibility of the administrative head as Director of Sister Islands Health Services. The anesthesiologist, as well as the obstetrician, gynecologist, may also be assigned ER duties in addition to their primary responsibilities, leaving a situation of not being readily available to ER patients. With a limited number of physicians, this Honorable House will be aware it proved difficult to provide on-site coverage to the ER outside normal working hours on weekends. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that less emergency cases after hours were triaged and assessed by the registered nurse, who informed the on-call off-site physicians to get the treatment plan. In these instances wherein the family brings a very sick patient to the ER or the ambulance bringing in the originally sick or injured, patients do not have any on-site doctor to attend immediately. Even though the off-site doctor is called about the patient in ER in acute emergencies, it could take 15 to 20 minutes for the physician to reach the ER. Mr. Speaker, it was proposed to add 1 ER internal medicine physician to the team to allow the schedule to be staggered and provide coverage for the on-site physician in ER until 11 p.m. Since the majority of patients visit ER through and up until those late hours, the arrangement would provide higher quality of patient care, clinical practice, and improve overall satisfaction of our patients. Mr. Speaker, the ER internal medicine physician post at Faith Hospital now provides a more cost-effective and convenient service for those living in Cayman Brac and benefits not only Faith Hospital and the hospital in Grand Cayman, but also the Cayman Islands as a whole, with reductions in the number of outpatient referrals and medical evacuations. As such, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture requested an increase in the budget appropriation for HEA 6 medical services in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman by $87,500 to fund the post as per request from the HSA. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance, Economic Development advised at the time that the proposed supplementary funding to increase the government's forecast operating expenses, $87,500, and decrease the forecast operating surplus to 31st of December 2017 by the same amount. It was deemed that the absence of an on-site doctor after hours, Mr. Speaker, could also potentially expose the HSA to risks of litigation. Accordingly, the approval was granted. Under NGS 55, indigents, seafarers, and veterans are provided tertiary medical care at various local and overseas institutions based on referrals by the Chief Medical Officer, who is stationed at the HSA. The Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture received a budget of $17.166 million in 2016-17 eighth-month fiscal year for the NGS 55. Mr. Speaker, for the period of July 2016 to February 2017, expenditure incurred across the NGS 55 total $11,753,000. These costs are initially undertaken by the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, Cineco, and then reimbursed by the Ministry through the NGS 55 appropriation. Based on Cineco's projection, the budgeted amount was considered inadequate to cover the end of the fiscal year. In order to ensure that the group of persons serviced by the NGS 55 have access to the appropriate medical institutions and services, as well as preserve the relationship and reputation of the government among the network of local and overseas healthcare providers, it was necessary for the ministry to request this supplementary funding. This Honourable House should be aware, Mr. Speaker, of similar requests for supplementary fundings in prior years for NGS 55. The budget for this program continues to be inadequate for the growing need due to increasing numbers of indigents, seafarers, and veterans, and dependents, and the escalating costs of tertiary overseas health care. While the CMO approves the referrals on behalf of Cineco, the ministry has minimal control over the actual referral process and no control over who is deemed eligible for the benefits as indigent seafarers or veterans. Mr. Speaker, this Honourable House will also be aware that the health insurance regulations are amended in 2013 to double the health insurance providers' contribution to the segregated insurance fund, which is intended to help cover the cost of health care for indigents and took effect in February 2013. At the increased rate, the fund is forecasted to collect close to $5 million per annum. The fund collections for the year July 2015 to 2016 amounted to approximately $5 million. However, that amount was still significantly below the cost of providing health care for the seafarers and veterans, which is approximately $1.6 million per month for the NGS 55. Mr. Speaker, at the time, the Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture was able to identify compensating savings totaling $4 million in its 2016-17 operational budget. The Minister of Finance and Economic Development advised that the proposed supplementary funding would increase the government's forecast operating expenses to December 31st, 2017 by $4 million. Mr. Speaker, delaying or denying necessary medical care for indigent seafarers or veterans presented a significant liability to government in the event that a patient's referral is not actioned due to the budgetary constraints and their condition deteriorates. There is a high probability that the patient or the family would file a lawsuit against the government, Mr. Speaker. There were also human rights concerns that were considered, given that the Bill of Rights under the Constitution is now in effect. Further, the inability to pay local and overseas providers of medical services already provided to indigent seafarers and veterans could result in lawsuits against the government. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, on the 29th of November 2016, Cabinet approved supplementary funding of NGS 55, tertiary care at various local and overseas institutions by $3,908,393. In March 2017, Cabinet granted an approval for supplementary funding in the amount of $4 million for NGS 55. Additionally, on the 22nd of August 2017, Cabinet approved supplementary funding of NGS 55 by $6,268,403. These additional approvals resulted in a total budget of $27.434 million for 2016-17 financial year. With the additional funding, all costs for this group were fully covered for the 2016 financial year. Mr. Speaker, members will be aware that the Cayman National Cultural Foundation is under the auspices of the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture, and Housing. In 1998, the ministry, at that time Ministry of Community Affairs, Sports, Women, Youth, and Culture, was named as co-defendant in a case resulting from injury to an individual present at the CNCF K-Fest event on the 22nd of August 2017. Approval was granted for the funding of $4.5 million to cover the estimated cost of administration fees to settle this case. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable House will be aware of the various issues that have plagued the Department of Environment and Health in the recent months. In October 2017, the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture, and Housing was notified by DEH of a shortfall in its operational funding. As a result, significant usage of overtime. The DEH advised that additional funding was needed to ensure essential operations and services for the remainder of the financial year. The ministry was unable to identify funding with its own allocation to cover the forecasted shortfall of CI $2.442 million. However, the ministry was able to facilitate a reallocation of $385,000 from EI 53 to DEH HES 7 budget heading. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance and Economic Development advised that the proposed reallocation of funds from EI 53, a capital expenditure appropriation, to HES 7, an operating expense appropriation, would decrease the government's forecast capital expenditure to the 31st of December 2017 by $385,000 and increase the forecast operating expenses by the same amount. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance advised that in order to proceed with the approval of the proposed $2.442 million exceptional circumstances transaction, Cabinet would identify savings within the ministries, portfolios, and offices, 2016-17 budgets, and reallocate the equivalent amount of savings. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, Cabinet granted approval for the Ministry of Health, Culture, and Housing to increase the HES 7 appropriation by $385,000 and decrease the EI 53 appropriation by the same amount, and increase the HES 7 appropriation by $2.442 million and instruct the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development decreasing other appropriations across government by the same amount. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture, and Housing, through DEH, participated in the annual National Community Enhancement project, which required some transactions for this ministry in 2015-16 and 2016-17 fiscal years. This undertaking is the government's demonstration to continue seasonal employment with the objective of enhancing the environment by providing meaningful work for unemployed Caymanians. The authorizing of the funding of the NICE project was done in advance of the exercise in December 2016, with an estimated budget set at $475,000 for the 3-week program to Christmas. Mr. Speaker, the actual cost of the were $429,000, a saving of $45,860. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of District Administration, Tourism and Transport paid $54,396 for the cleanup on the sister islands directly, leaving a total of $374,744 to be funded by other relevant ministries for the 2016 NICE program. The HES 7 collection, recycling and disposal of waste was increased by the amount of $176,205. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, for the 2017 NICE program, the HES 7 collection, recycling and disposal of waste was increased by the amount of $223,250. Mr. Speaker, Cabinet was asked to authorize the transfer of funds in the amount of $1,445,000 from the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing's capital budget, EI 53, to the Departments of Environment operational budget, HES 7, to fund the completed tires processing and to facilitate continuing processing of the remaining used tires stored at the Georgetown landfill. Mr. Speaker, this Honorable House will be aware that there was an urgent need to remove the growing piles of used tires stored at the landfill. The pile was deemed as a fire hazard and a public health concern given the potential as a breeding ground for mosquitoes. During rainy seasons, a contract was carried out through the Central Tenders Committee, and Island Recycling Limited was the successful contractor. In May 2016, approval was granted to the increase of Ministries of Health, Culture's 2015-16 operational budget via the EVH 19 appropriation of $1,245,000 to process 0.5 million tires. Funds were to be taken from the Environmental Protection Fund. Mr. Speaker, the contract with the successful bidder was not signed until after the 2015-16 financial year, so the funding could not be secured in this financial year, and therefore no funding was drawn down from the EPF for this project. This request was the Ministry's way of regularizing the situation to properly allocate the funds for the initial contract, $1.24 million, and the proposed addendum to finish processing the stockpile tires, $200,000. An exact tonnage figure of tires could not be supplied, Mr. Speaker, as the contract was entered into on an estimate only. It was agreed that the first 5,000 tons of tires would be charged to the ministry at a cost of $189 per ton of material transported out of the landfill, plus some costs for de-rimming the tires, $4 per tire, to prepare them for shredding. All subsequent tonnage of recycled tire material would be charged to the ministry at a cost of $129 per ton. The payment method was based on tonnage. Mr. Speaker, although the contract agreement with Island Recycling was signed on the 15th of August 2016, processing of the tires did not begin until March 2017, after the 1-acre operational pad was constructed and shredding equipment was brought on island. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report that this project has now been completed. Mr. Speaker, a contract addendum was issued to Island Recycling to process the additional 1,550 tons of tires, which amounted to an additional $200,000, Mr. Speaker. They are smaller quantities of fire-damaged tires and tires that are too dirty to process, and it is anticipated that these will be treated when the new integrated solid waste management system is in effect. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development advises that the proposed reallocation of funds from EI 53, a capital expenditure appropriation, to HEA 7, an operating expense appropriation, will decrease the government's forecast capital expenditure to 31st of December 2017 by 1.445 million and increase the forecast operating expense by the same amount. Mr. Speaker, the final reallocation of funds from my ministry 2016-17 capital account was from the budget heading EI 53 to the National Gallery's budget head EI 47. The amount of $29,000 was done to facilitate the acquisition of 5 new pieces of artwork. It is no secret, Mr. Speaker, that I am a supporter of heritage and arts and believe that more should be done to acquire, to preserve what we hold dear. On one of my first official visits to the National Gallery, the director shared a desire to acquire additional pieces for the National Permanent Collection, a goal that was prevented due to the lack of funding. Mr. Speaker, I consider it a great opportunity to recognize the work of some of our talented artists. These men, Mr. Ray Banker, Mr. Horacio Esteban, Mr. Al Ebanks, Mr. Aston Ebanks, and young Brandon Sanders, are skilled artists. The pieces, which are deemed the finest caliber, are classified as contemporary art. It should be noted that this is an area of strategic development for the collection. The contemporary art section focuses on work that challenges existing borders and begins articulating new meanings for contemporary Caymanian identity. It offers an unparalleled record of the Cayman Islands' rich artistic and cultural history during the aspirations, character, and imaginations of our people. Mr. Speaker, the pieces were carefully selected by the National Gallery Collections and Exhibition Committee. Criteria included the significance of the artist, the standard of the work, the significance of the work and work in an exhibition, and popular appeal. Mr. Speaker, the artists are no strangers to the art world and are extremely successful in their field. Long-established artists, Mr. Esteban, Mr. Banker, and Mr. Ali Banks, are part of the Native Sons Collective. Mr. Aston Ebanks is a well-known conceptual artist, while Mr. Brandon Saunders is currently studying art, but began publicly exhibiting his work at the age of 15. Let me take a few minutes, Mr. Speaker, to briefly discuss the pieces of Mr. Ray Bankers. On Our Way, 1994-1999, illustrates the cultural collage between American and Caribbean exchange of ideas. The humorous sculpture is a commercial ready-made which reflects the power of branding and the homogenization of Caribbean culture. The world-famous signage for a fast food brand has been altered by the artist to invite us to contemplate the impact of globalization and consumer culture within the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Al Ebanks' piece, Remnants of the Artist, was created using found materials and acrylic to create a self-portrait. Mr. Ebanks is best known for his large abstract work, of which this is a piece of a fine example of his skill. The work was featured in the seminal Native Sons 20 exhibition. Moving on to Mr. Ashton Ebanks, Mr. Speaker, his piece is entitled Joni Mitchell Never Lies. Referencing to Joni Mitchell's lyrics in the song Big Yellow Taxi. The image is presented as though seen from a car window. Mr. Ebanks draws on a parallel with the challenges we face in Cayman Islands in striking a balance between development and maintaining the environment we live in as an expression of who we are. The piece entitled Mother and Child is a sculpture created by Mr. Esteban. It draws upon the Christian symbolism of the Madonna and baby Jesus. Mr. Esteban beautifully carved Caymanite stone to capture the intimacy of the mother and child relationship. Mr. Speaker, the final piece is from young Mr. Saunders, still a high school student. He is well on his way to success in the arts. It is an image that illustrates the continued influence of the marine environment in the forging of Caymanian identity. The artist drew on the inspiration for Caymanian and regional history, popular culture, and folklore in the pieces titled Osiris. Mr. Speaker, before completing this reallocation, the Ministry of Health, Environment, Housing, and Culture sought advice from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. The advice relayed was that proposed appropriation change will not have an impact on the government's forecast financial performance or compliance with the principles of responsible financial management 2016-17 financial period, as the appropriation change was just a reallocation of funds and does not increase planned expenditure or cash outflows. As a result of this reallocation, these outstanding pieces will now be held in perpetuity for the people of the Cayman Islands. I want to encourage all our local artists to continue creating and developing more of these beautiful works of arts in the future. I also invite members of this honorable house and the general public to take time to visit the National Gallery to view these pieces, along with the other pieces of more traditional and figurative works in the national collection. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. God bless. Oh boy.
I have received statements from the Honorable Minister of Commerce and also the Minister for Financial Affairs. Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a statement. Thank you, Sarge. As to the circumstances and reasons why what was a former Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure, PLAHI, was able to reallocate funds from and within its 2016-17 budget under Section 11.5 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision. Mr. Speaker, the 2016-17 financial year to date, the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure required appropriation changes on a number of occasions as follows. Mr. Speaker, in August 2016, the ministry received an increased allocation in supplementary funding of CI $307,950, which was placed in the new TP appropriation ex gratia payments to facilitate the compensation payments to owners of displaced residential properties impacted by the ongoing project to widen the Linford-Pearson Highway. Mr. Speaker, this appropriation was topped up by an additional CI $243,553 approved by Cabinet in February of 2017 upon the completion of the tender exercise for the construction of the replacement homes. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of PLAHI transferred the day-to-day management and responsibilities of the Crown property known as the former John Silver's Inn, being Block 4D, parcels 279 and 280, from the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure to the Ministry of Community Affairs, decreased its appropriation PAH 15 by CI $17,760. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure purchased undeveloped land at Smith's Back Adair, South Sound sourcing funding from the purchase from the Environmental Protection Fund. The government decided that it was the best interest of the public for this parcel not to be developed, but that it is instead purchased by the Crown to ensure continued public use and enjoyment as a beach park. Therefore, an increase of US $5,439,237.87 to the EA4 land purchase appropriation, a decrease of US $5,439,237.87 to the Environmental Protection Fund. Also, Mr. Speaker, appropriation PAH4, Management of Public Recreational Facilities and Cemeteries, increased in the amount of CI $198,539 to assist with the National Community Enhancement Project known as NICE. This is a project that provides short-term employment for unemployed Caymanians. In an effort to assist with funding this initiative, the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure reduced the following appropriations: PA14, PAH9, and PLN30 in the amounts of CI $56,938. Going on, Mr. Speaker, an increase was approved by Cabinet for the appropriation captioned EA36 Miscellaneous Road Surface Upgrades in the 2015-16 budget. The Ministry had instructed in 2015-16, the Ministry had instructed the National Roads Authority to repave the Georgetown Hospital car park at a cost of CI $142,668.75. The National Roads Authority, meanwhile, had widened Smith Road, taken land from the Health Services Authority, and in order to do so, incurring a roads law compensation liability of CI $148,190. Cabinet agreed to set one off against the other, with the balance to be paid to the Health Services Authority. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Planning, Lands and Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure was advised to achieve this by reallocating CI $142,668.75 from Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure EA9 land purchase, gazetted claims, to Planning, Lands, to PLAHI EA36 miscellaneous road surface upgrades. Mr. Speaker, the next occasion in the 2016-17 budget requiring the reallocation of funds related to a request from the Attorney General's chambers at the Portfolio of Legal Affairs was made to the Facilities Management section to construct additional offices in the Government Administration Building at a cost of CI $75,000. As the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure had no funding allocated for this unexpected request, funding was provided by the Attorney General's Chamber and the Portfolio of Legal Affairs. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, CI $75,000 was transferred from appropriation EI 134, Equity Injection Portfolio of Legal Affairs, to PLAHI, appropriation EA 78, Government Office Accommodations Project 1. Mr. Speaker, the government had a number of priority projects that required funding, such as the land for the Spots Public Beach Parking, a generator for the East End Primary School, the Cowood Beach Project, and the new West Bay Cemetery Project. Mr. Speaker, given that the Ministry of Community Affairs, Youth and Sports did not foresee utilizing some funds in their budget, we agreed to collaborate with them to assist in funding these projects. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we reduced the Ministry of One minute, Mr. Speaker. the Ministry of Community Affairs, Youth and Sports Appropriation EI 54, equity investments to purchase entity assets CI 1,200,000, and reduce the appropriation EI 71 entity investments by CI 700,000, and then, Mr. Speaker, transferred, that is, increased Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure's budget appropriation EA 142, Georgetown Revitalization, by CI 850,000, and then increase the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure's budget appropriation EA4, land purchases, by CI 300,000, and then, Mr. Speaker, reallocated CI 41,000 from the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure's budget output PAH8, Management of Special Projects, to the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure's budget appropriation TP76, Assistance for Infrastructure Development. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, created a new executive asset for minor district works for Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure, thereby increasing Ministry of Planning, Land, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure's appropriation 16-17 budget by 750,000. Mr. Speaker, the details of the reallocation of funds from and within the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture and Housing and Infrastructure that required additional funding can be found in the 2016-17 Supplementary Annual Plan and Estimates, which were tabled in the House. Mr. Speaker, also wish to make a statement to the circumstance and reasons why the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure was able to reallocate funds from and within its 2016-17 budget under Section 11.5 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision. Mr. Speaker, during the 2016-17 financial year to date, the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure required appropriation changes on the following. 1, reduce the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure's budget appropriation EA 36, miscellaneous road surface upgrades, by CI 150,000. And 2, increase the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure's budget EA 147, miscellaneous district projects, CI 150,000. And Mr. Speaker, this reallocation was due to increased costs associated to the Cowood Beach and East End generator projects, indicating they are over budget by CI 70,500 and CI 8,000 respectively. This allocation used to cover the cost of the Gavin Park seawall and some other minor district projects. Ministry had funds in the budget appropriation EA 36, miscellaneous road surface upgrades, that could be utilized to offset the cost in EA 147, miscellaneous district projects. This reallocation will not impact the project's allocation to EA 36, miscellaneous road surface upgrades. Mr. Speaker, Ministry was advised by the National Roads Authority that the project expenditure for the Linford Pearson project, which indicated an overspend. Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure reviewed our allocation. However, we were unable to identify any underspend to cover the shortage and therefore sought assistance from Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands. The supplementary expenditure being requested for the Linford Pearson project overspend can be associated to unexpected costs related to the movement of the CUC poles. Additionally, certain areas required more demucking and fill than was initially anticipated. The Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture, and Lands reviewed their capital budget and was able to identify underspend. The Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture, and Lands were asked to assist with this project and thus obliged. The estimated amount needed to cover the overspend on the Linford-Pearson Highway project is approximately $240,000. Funding for this project has been identified and will be taken from the Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture, and Lands budget EI-12 in the amount of CI $240,000. This action will decrease the overall planned expenditure for for Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture, and Land and increase appropriation EA-142 by CI $240,000. Mr. Speaker, Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure received an increased appropriation in the amount of CI $251,750 to PAH4, Management of the Public Recreational Facilities and Cemeteries, to assist with the National Community Enhancement Project, known as NICE. Mr. Speaker, as you know, this project that provides short-term employment for unemployed Caymanians and was greatly received and utilized within the communities. So, Mr. Speaker, those are my two statements for the House. Thank you, sir.
The Honorable Minister of Financial Services, I have received a statement from that minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Section 11.6 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2018 revision, I rise to advise members of this Honourable House of several exceptional circumstances under which the Cabinet authorised executive financial transactions in accordance with Section 11.5, primarily during the fourth quarter of 2017, during the finance period ending December 31st, 2017. Mr. Speaker, generally the detail that I will provide can be cross-referenced in the 2016-17 Supplementary Plan and Estimates. However, there are a number of changes that relate to the organizational restructuring after the election that will affect the totals presented. And, Mr. Speaker, those changes are noted in the Supplementary Plan and Estimates. Mr. Speaker, an increase in FSC 7 by CI $605,571 was made for the Department of Financial Services. This increase related to unforeseen events, in particular the release of the Paradise Papers and the heightened discussion with the EU regarding the blacklisting process raised the need for the assistance of outside counsel. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, it was agreed that the Ministry would work with Cayman Finance to fund a crisis communications campaign to address the negative public perception arising from these events. Mr. Speaker, the net change in the FSC 7 was decreased by CI $117,654 as part of the Ministry's contribution to the Community Enhancement Program, the NICE program, bringing the total for this output group to CI $487,917. Mr. Speaker, an increase in FSC 10 by $2,077,401 was made for General Registry. In 2016-2017, Mr. Speaker, it was anticipated that a new online platform for use by the corporate service providers would be introduced by a private software developer. While originally conceived as a system solutions to be purchased by General Registry, as a cost savings measure, it was decided that the ownership of the system would be retained by the developer. The developer would recover their costs from the sale of the platform, with General Registry standing to benefit from a new revenue stream as opposed to bearing the full cost of the project. Mr. Speaker, the new system was forecast to bring in entity revenue for the General Registry at roughly CI $3 million over the 18-month period. This was a conservative estimate based on discussions with the software developer at the time. Mr. Speaker, given this anticipated revenue, cabinet funding was not included in the budget to cover the portion of the General Registry's operating costs, which was to be covered by the anticipated third-party revenue stream. However, Mr. Speaker, there were delays in the system implementation and the launch did not occur until April 2017. Furthermore, certain aspects of the service were not introduced at that time, which consequently impacted the revenue to General Registry. And Mr. Speaker, as the system is owned by the developer, the General Registry did not have an input in the decision at that time. Mr. Speaker, an increase of HCA 15 by CI $1,267,163 and HCA 17 by CI $1,267,164, both for the fire service, took place. These changes are reflected in the changes to the FSC 32 and FSC 33 output groups, respectively. Mr. Speaker, in April 2017, all ministries and portfolios were contacted to, in April 2016, all ministries and portfolios were contacted to determine their ability to cover the cost of a pay stagnation award based on formulas prepared by the portfolio of the civil service. Progressing to pay these awards to staff was dependent on all ministries and portfolios identifying the required savings to cover the new costs from within their budget, with only part of these costs covered by the budget of the portfolio of civil service. In June 2016, it was communicated to all agencies that the award would go ahead. Payments were subsequently made to eligible staff in December 2016. The fire service budget for 2016-2017 did not fully cover the funding for the pay stagnation. However, Mr. Speaker, the former ministry responsible for Home Affairs anticipated that it would offset these costs to some degree by savings in other areas. These savings were not fully realized, and no funding was transferred from the portfolio of the civil service to offset the pay stagnation award. Combined with a delay in the recruitment of new fire officers and significantly underfunded over time, the result was a substantial overspend in personnel costs. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, an amount of 200,000 CI was required to pay shift-based fire officers for notional public holidays in 2016. An audit conducted in December 2016 of the overtime payment and practices in the fire service found that for 2016 year, the department was not in compliance with the personnel regulations, as fire officers were not given a day off in lieu of the work public holiday or compensated for the lost day. Mr. Speaker, there was also an overspending cost related to vehicles, firefighting equipment and supplies, and building maintenance due to a higher than average number of incidents and critical remediation work that had to be carried out to address mold issues that were contributing to employee illness, per a report issued by DEH. Mr. Speaker, an increase in HCA 11 by CI $976,608 was made for the prison service. This is reflected under the output group FSC 34. For the prison service, overtime was one of the main reasons for the overspending. In particular, Mr. Speaker, a lack of appropriate staffing levels resulted in a need to incur overtime in order to ensure adequate coverage for the children's unit, staffing of the camera room, and the provision of critical interventions like the sex offender treatment program. Mr. Speaker, given that the pay stagnation award in December 2016 was not fully funded in the budget, this further compounded the problem. Increasing maintenance costs was a secondary reason for the prison services overspend due to the continuing deterioration of the prison facilities. Additionally, due to the unpredictable nature of healthcare costs for prisoners and the higher number of inmate admissions for surgery and other treatment, there was also overspend in the healthcare costs. Mr. Speaker, a reclassification of 540,000 CI dollars from NEM 8 to EI 67 equity injections for Cabinet to exercise its authority under Section 11.5 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2013 so as to approve the reclassification of appropriated funds in the amount of 540,000 from NEM 8 to EI 11 equity injections was carried out. Given that this change was offset by the amounts resulting from the post-election reorganization, changes to the output group FSC 30 are not shown in the 2016-17 supplementary plan and estimates. Honourable members will appreciate that the National Public Safety Trunked Radio System is a component of the country's critical infrastructure. The radio system provides a vital communications platform for Cayman's security, emergency, and public safety agencies, including police, fire and rescue, ambulance, immigration and customs enforcement, and others. As the radio system is now 20 years old, it is failing to provide sufficient coverage across the island. Moreover, replacement parts are no longer available for the current system as the technology is outdated. In summary, Mr. Speaker, the current public safety radio system is in dire need of replacement, and to this end, the Cabinet authorized the Ministry for Home Affairs to procure and acquire a fit-for-purpose replacement solution. Mr. Speaker, following a comprehensive and competitive procurement process which was approved by the Central Tenders Committee, the Ministry identified Motorola, a U.S. company, as a preferred supplier of a modern digital radio communication system, given the value of the radio system with regards to the delivery of emergency rescue, disaster response, law enforcement, and other public safety services. It was necessary to secure the financial commitment required to progress with the acquisition. Mr. Speaker, analysis indicated that the preferred option for the Cayman Islands government was acquisition of the radio system by outright purchase. This option will not add to the government's debt. Moreover, the outright purchase will save between 1.2 million and 1.8 million in gross interest charges at 6.95%. Acquisition by outright purchase, however, required a reclassification of expenditure from lease payment to an equity injection of $540,000 in the 2017 fiscal year. A reclassification of CI 48,000 from EMC 1 to EI 67 for Hazard Management Cayman Islands to enable the implementation of a broadcast emergency alert system was also needed. This is reflected under the output group FSC 31. Mr. Speaker, following the Saul incident, the Hazard Management Cayman Islands identified a need to escalate the implementation of the broadcast emergency alert system, and in collaboration with OFREG, meetings were held with ICT providers to discuss the development and implementation of such a system. All stakeholders supported the proposal, and it was agreed that the phased approach to the implementation should be pursued. And as was covered in my statement to this Honourable House during our sittings in Cayman Brac last week, the three phases that were recommended for the broadcast emergency alert system are as follows. Phase 1, identify and install a system that will allow both Hazard Management Cayman Islands to broadcast emergency messages on all radio networks simultaneously from Hazard Management Cayman Islands remotely. Phase 2, extend the notification system to television and cable providers. And Phase 3, notification system extended to enable residents to be informed via a centralized portal that supports multiple communication channels, including wireless emergency alerts via cell broadcast, mobile networks via SMS, internet via social media, and email. So, Mr. Speaker, in order to progress the implementation of Phase 1, the Hazard Management Cayman Islands required a reclassification of $48,000 from the operating appropriation EMC 1 to the capital appropriation EI 67. This reduced the government's forecast operating expenses to 31st December 2017 and increased capital expenditure by the same amount. These reallocations did have an impact on the government's financial performance, but did not negatively affect compliance with the principles of responsible financial management for the 2016-2017 financial year. And Mr. Speaker, issues that led to these shortfalls as discussed above, in particular staff capacity and deteriorating physical assets, are being addressed in the 2018 and 2019 budgets as approved. Mr. Speaker, there are a few other exceptional circumstances that took place pre the elections in 2017. And during the 2016-2017 financial year, while the previous ministry had responsibility for the environment, a settlement amount for CI 300,000 was received in relation to damage caused by a coral reef by a Cayman Islands registered yacht. These funds were intended to be used in the design and installation of permanent moorings, but to do so, the increase in expenditure had to be appropriated despite the settlement amount. And also, Mr. Speaker, in 2016-2017, there was an increase in the appropriation for the Cayman Islands Development Bank by CI 6,280,000 for the repayment of debt. Mr. Speaker, this was dealt with through the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development and not by the then Ministry of Financial Services, Commerce and Environment. I thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
Received a statement from the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two statements. The first, Mr. Speaker, deals with exceptional circumstances for the portfolio of legal affairs during the 2016-2017 financial period. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 11.6 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2018 revision, I make the statement to members of this Honourable House regarding exceptional circumstances which were approved by the Cabinet for the portfolio of legal affairs during the 18-month budget period ending 31st December 2017. Mr. Speaker, the exceptional circumstances required making changes to appropriations which I will briefly outline. One, Mr. Speaker, in order to expand its existing allocated accommodation within the government admin building, in 2016, the portfolio of legal affairs requested the assistance of the Facilities Management Department, the Ministry of Planning, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure to create additional offices for improved functionality. Two, Mr. Speaker, Facilities Management estimated that the necessary work would cost approximately 75,000 CI dollars. And the Ministry of Planning, Plahi Ministry, advised that they would not be in a position to absorb this cost of the project, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the portfolio of legal affairs, on review of its capital budget, identified savings within EI 34 in the amount of CI $75,000, which could be utilized to fund the fit-out cost. A reallocation of funding in the amount of $75,000 from appropriation EI 34 to appropriation EA 78, which is Government Accommodation Project 1, Ministry of Plahi, was therefore required to enable facilities management to undertake the necessary work. Mr. Speaker, the portfolio of legal affairs therefore recommended that the $75,000 be reallocated to appropriation EA 78 pursuant to Section 11.5 of the Public Management and Finance Law. At the time of the portfolio's recommendation, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance advised that the proposed reallocation of funds from EI 34 to EA 78 would not impact the government's forecast financial performance or compliance with the principle of responsible financial management for the 2016-2017 financial year, as the appropriation change was a reallocation of funds and did not increase planned expenditure or cash outflows. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the above exceptional circumstances which were approved by the Cabinet for the portfolio of legal affairs during the 2016-2017 financial period on 13th of December 2016, along with the overall effect on the government's compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, can be found in the 2016-2017 supplementary plan and estimates, which was tabled in this honorable House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the second statement has to do with exceptional circumstances that occurred during the 2016-2017 financial period for the judicial administration. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 11.6 of the Public Management and Finance Law, I made the following statement to members of this honorable House regarding exceptional circumstances which were approved by the Cabinet for judicial administration during the 18-month period ending 31st of December 2017. Mr. Speaker, the exceptional circumstances that required making the changes to the appropriation are as follows. The judicial administration was granted funding in 2016-2017 to hire personnel for the newly established Legal Aid Office, headed by the Legal Aid Director. Mr. Speaker, in order to establish the Legal Aid Office, suitable accommodation had to be identified. Funding for the new accommodation did not form part of the 2016-2017 budget. So in order to address this issue, monies allocated for the hiring of the new legal aid staff were used to secure a lease, and these monies have been ring-fenced to allow for fit-out, subject to Cabinet's approval. Mr. Speaker, permission was granted by Cabinet in 2017 to lease 2 units at Town Plaza for the purposes of establishing a legal aid office and a legal aid clinic. The Public Works Department costed the project to be approximately $335,000. This total cost comprised the following. 1, $250,000 pre-tender estimate for construction. 2, $75,000 funding and fittings. And 3, Mr. Speaker, $10,000 in contingency. The Judicial Administration identified savings from JAD2, support for court proceedings, that could be utilized to cover the fit-out cost. A reallocation of funding totaling $335,000 from JAD2 to EI21 was therefore required to complete the fit-out. Judicial Administration recommended that $335,000 be reallocated to appropriation EI21 under Section 11.5 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2017. At the time, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance advised that the proposed reallocation of funds from JAD2 and an operating expense appropriation to EI21, a capital expenditure appropriation, would decrease the government's forecast operating expenses to 31st December 2017 by $335,000 and increase the forecast capital expenditure by the same amount. At the time, the ministry advised that the government remained in compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, as prior to this proposed reallocation of funds, core government is forecast to incur $879.8 million in operating expenses for the 18-month period ending 31st December 2017, $55.0 million in net surplus, and $60.6 million in capital expenditure, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, the above exceptional circumstances which were approved by the Cabinet for judicial administration during the 2016-2017 financial period, Cabinet extract dated December 14, 2017, along with the overall effect on the government's compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, can be found in the 2016-2017 supplementary plan and estimates, which was tabled in this Honorable House on the 12th of September 2018, Mr. Speaker, which is today. I thank you.
I have received a statement from the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor responsible for this civil service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as required by Section 11.6 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2018 revision, I rise to make this statement to members of this Honorable House with respect to the exceptional circumstances transactions that were approved by the Cabinet for the portfolio of the Civil Service during the 2016-17 18-month budget period that ended on 31st December 2017. Such transactions were approved pursuant to Section 11.5 of the PMFL. Mr. Speaker, this statement provides details of the aforementioned transactions. $1.989 million for OEE 108 pay stagnation. Mr. Speaker, as members of this Honorable House will recall, during the height of the economic recession, numerous HR austerity measures were adopted, including a prolonged salary cut and pay freeze within the civil service. As a consequence of these measures, the salaries of long-serving civil servants had fallen behind newly appointed staff who retained the ability to negotiate salaries upon entry to the service. To address this inequity, which had kept the salaries of many civil servants frozen for 3 or more years, with a significant number having been frozen for 7 or more years, the Deputy Governor approved and the government funded a program to remediate pay stagnation across the civil service. Mr. Speaker, the first civil servants to receive the pay stagnation remedy were our teachers and police officers who received the payments in the prior financial year. To allow this remedy to be applied across the remainder of those affected within the civil service, the government approved as part of the 2016-17 annual budget $1.989 million under other executive expenses, or OE 108, to fund pay stagnation. I am pleased to report, Mr. Speaker, that the civil service applied the pay stagnation remedy in 2016-17, benefiting some 1,516 employees, approximately half having seen their salaries frozen for 7 or more years. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, these payments were facilitated without drawing upon the appropriation in OE 108. As a result, the portfolio was able to reduce its appropriations by $1.989 million and return these funds to government. The program allowed the Cayman Islands government as an employer to favorably respond to concerns of employee engagement and retention and to remediate against inequalities that emerged during that period. Changes to civil service remuneration levels during the budgeted period has led to an increase in the average salary for a civil servant rising to $46,575 per annum, or $3,881 per month. $228,500 for servicing of the Legislative Assembly and members of the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, during the 2016-17 financial period, the government approved a total of $228,500 in additional funding to cover increased operational and capital needs of the Legislative Assembly following the 2017 general elections, which was contested on the basis of single-member constituencies and resulted in an increase in the number of elected members of the Legislative Assembly. The total sum of $288,500 was allocated over several appropriations as follows: $88,000 for entity operational needs for the Legislative Assembly, Civ 10, servicing of the Legislative Assembly and members of the Legislative Assembly. The Legislative Assembly has increased operational expenditures to cover the following matters: fees for the new recording system, which was partially acquired as a service as opposed to a capital asset as originally budgeted, delivery of the parliamentary prayer breakfast, various attractive asset purchases including computers, hardware, software, and office equipment for MLAs and staff, and official travel and other general expenses. $50,500 for administrative and advisory assistance to the Speaker, OE 114, administrative and advisory assistance to the Speaker. Following the 2017 general elections, approval was received to provide additional support to the Speaker of the House. The additional funding allowed the appointment of a personal assistant and a driver to the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. $43,000 upgrades to the Legislative Assembly building. EA 54 upgrades to executive assets. This additional funding was used to enhance Wi-Fi capabilities, CCTV, and fire alarm systems, and to complete security fencing at the Legislative Assembly. $47,000 for the purchase of entity assets for the Legislative Assembly, EI 35 equity injection portfolio of the Civil Service. Funding approval was received to acquire a new binding machine and for the Legislative Assembly and to purchase a replacement vehicle for the Honorable Speaker. The initial vehicle being used was on loan from another ministry and has been returned. $35,000 for the purchases of entity assets for the Commission Secretariat, EI 35 portfolio of the Civil Service. Funding was approved for the purchase of 2 new vehicles urgently required to replace the existing fleet used by investigators, as the repair costs for the vehicles were now exceeding the value of the vehicles, and as such, the vehicles were no longer deemed to be suitable for operations by the Department of Vehicle and Equipment Services. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the government did not incur any overall additional cost as a result of these exceptional circumstances. As the Cabinet approval was late in the 2016-17 financial year, the portfolio was in a position to identify savings within its current budget to fund all the increased expenditure that was approved for the Legislative Assembly and the Commission Secretariat. The portfolio contributed $263,500 from the appropriation captioned IE 35 portfolio of the Civil Service to subsidize the increased costs of the operational and capital purchases for the Legislative Assembly, as well as the capital purchases for the Commission Secretariat. The Legislative Assembly was able to identify $116,500 in savings by foregoing the purchase of the recording system. The Legislative Assembly's original budget of $200,000 for the purchase of a new recording system was accessed. However, through further review of proposals, it was determined that it was more cost-effective to purchase microphones only whilst renting the recording equipment. In addition, the Elections Office did not utilize all of its funding for the voter registration system and was therefore able to contribute $97,000 in savings. This overall reduction of original budgeted capital purchases of $263,000 netted against the $82,000 increase for new asset purchases totaled a net reduction in the appropriation EI 35 portfolio of the Civil Service by $181,500. $269,470 for operational expenditure for the Office of Education Standards, Civ 16 Educational Evaluation Services. After the May 2017 elections, the portfolio inherited the Office of Educational Standards from the Ministry of Education. The 2016-17 allocation for the OES was transferred from the Ministry of Education to the portfolio of the Civil Service. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I thank you for allowing me to explain the exceptional circumstance transactions which were approved by the Cabinet for the portfolio of the Civil Service during the 2016-17 financial year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Personal explanations.
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches.
None.
Rising of matters of privileges,
None.
government business bills, first reading of the supplementary appropriation, July 2016 to December 2017, Bill 2018.
The Honorable the Minister of Finance. The bill has been read a first time and is set down for a second reading. The House will suspend for 20 minutes.